Ever look at like a cathedral and wonder how something built with just stone and glass could be so amazing?
Yeah.
Like, how would they do that?
It's really incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. You might be surprised to learn there's this whole system of ancient wisdom kind of woven into those buildings.
Mm.
A way of thinking that saw beauty not just as like, oh, that's pretty, but like a reflection of deeper universal truth.
Ooh.
So today we're diving into the world of sacred geometry with Steve Hendricks.
Okay.
He's a craftsman who's actually bringing these ancient principles to life in his modern work.
Mm.
His keynote address on sacred geometry is our guide today, so get ready to see the world in a whole new way.
I'm ready.
Hendricks is really interesting because he approaches this as a builder, not just like some theorist.
Right.
He talks about how for most of history, beauty wasn't like this subjective thing like we think of it today. It was objective,
Mm.
something you could unlock by understanding geometry, almost like a secret code.
Oh.
There's even a saying from this medieval stonemasons guild that gets at this. They thought there was a specific point within a geometric construction,
Okay.
and if you could find it, you held the key to unlocking all art.
So it's like those builders were tapping into some hidden blueprint of beauty using geometry to translate it into physical form.
Exactly. Hendricks starts with this pattern called the 7 days of creation,
Okay.
where 6 circles fit perfectly around one.
I have to admit, when I hear 6 circles around one, I don't exactly get super excited.
Yeah, I know it sounds kind of basic, right?
Yeah.
But there's so much more to it. This pattern can create amazingly complex designs. Hendricks even used it for a transom he designed for Bryn Athyn College. But it's more than just that. It has deep symbolic meaning.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think about the idea of perfect numbers.
Okay.
6 is considered the first one because it's factors 1, 2, and 3 added to 6.
Right.
And when you multiply those same numbers, you also get 6. This idea of balance is mirrored in the geometry. The 6 circles, fitting perfectly around the 7th, represent unity, everything coming together as a whole.
Yeah.
It's like a visual representation of the creative power of the universe.
Wow, I'm starting to see how something as simple as circles can be so meaningful. It's like they're not just shapes. They're like a language, a way of expressing these deeper truths.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this idea of geometry as language is central to how ancient cultures viewed the world. Geometry wasn't just math.
Yeah.
It was a key to unlocking the mysteries of the cosmos.
So they weren't just measuring things. They were looking for a deeper meaning in the measurements.
Exactly. And this is connected to the Quadrivium.
Okay.
Those were considered the original liberal arts: number, geometry, music, and astronomy. All interconnected, each one a different lens to understand the universe.
The original liberal arts, that's fascinating. You're telling me ancient philosophers were basically rock stars.
Well, they were definitely revered for their knowledge.
Ah.
What's important is that they focused on the quality of numbers, not just quantity. Oneness, two-ness, three-ness, each had specific qualities and relationships. They called them correspondences, and this idea was central to their understanding of how the physical and spiritual were connected.
Okay, hold on. Correspondences, that's a new one for me. Can you break that down a bit further?
Imagine it like this. Every number is a symbol that points to a deeper meaning. Like 1 represents unity, the source of all things.
Yep.
2 represents duality, division, separation into opposites, and so on. Swedenborg wrote a lot about correspondences too. He thought that numbers in the spiritual realm didn't mean quantities, but qualities of things.
So it's like they were reading the universe like a giant book of symbols, and geometry was the key.
Yeah. And Swedenborg, in Arcana Coelestia number 7223, even says that the most ancient people, who were celestial men, considered all things representative, and hence they considered numbers as representative.
Mm.
They saw numbers as this universal language that could reveal the hidden connections between all things.
Mm-hmm. It makes me think of that saying, music is the universal language. Is there a connection there?
There totally is.
Yeah.
Music and architecture were also seen as expressions of this deeper geometric order. Remember that saying, architecture is frozen music?
Oh, yeah. I've always loved that one. But I never really thought about what it actually meant.
Well, musical harmony is based on mathematical ratios.
Right.
And those ratios can be represented geometrically, like the intervals between notes on a scale that correspond to specific proportions. And those same proportions can be found in temples and cathedrals.
Mm.
There's a researcher, Steve Bass, who has images showing how ancient structures were built using these musical ratios, almost like they were creating buildings that would resonate with a certain energy.
That's amazing. It's like they were composing symphonies in stone. And you're saying we can actually see those ratios in the architecture.
Absolutely. They believed that by incorporating those harmonious proportions into their buildings, they were creating spaces that would uplift the soul and connect people to the divine.
Okay, that makes me want to go on an architecture tour with a whole new perspective. But before we do, I have to ask, what about the night sky? The ancients spent a lot more time under the stars than we do. Did they see these same geometric patterns up there?
They did, and they saw a lot of meaning in those patterns. Think about how we still map the stars using Earth as the center, a geocentric model.
Wait, really? I always thought those star charts had the sun at the center.
We use the geocentric model because it reflects our experience of looking up in the sky from Earth.
Right.
It's how we observe the stars moving relative to us.
That makes sense. It's like we're putting ourselves in the perspective of the ancients, trying to see the sky through their eyes.
Exactly. And think about finding Polaris, the North Star. You're using that same geocentric perspective. It's a fixed point, while all the other stars seem to rotate around it.
Oh, that reminds me of learning to find Polaris using the Big Dipper when I was a kid. I never thought of it as a connection to ancient astronomy.
It is. And that's just one example. The ancients were fascinated by the movements of the planets, especially Venus. Did you know that Venus traces this 5-petaled flower pattern around Earth over an 8-year cycle?
A 5-petaled flower! That's incredible! It's almost like nature is drawing these perfect shapes on a huge scale, and 5 is another one of those special numbers, isn't it?
It is. We'll get more into that later. But think about it. They observed 7 planetary bodies moving against the fixed stars. That's where we get the names for the days of the week. Friday, for example, is named after Venus.
I never knew that. Suddenly, Friday feels a lot more celestial. But this brings up a question. We've talked about geometry and buildings in the stars, but where do we fit into all of this?
That's where Da Vinci and his famous Trivia Man comes in.
Okay.
It's that figure standing with his arms and legs outstretched, perfectly inside both a circle and a square.
Okay, I definitely know that image, but I have to admit, I never really understood what it was all about.
It represents squaring the circle, a concept that has fascinated philosophers and mathematicians for centuries. It symbolizes bringing together the spiritual realm, shown by the circle, with the material world, represented by the square.
So it's like bringing together the infinite and the finite, heaven and earth, all in a human being. That's powerful.
And Da Vinci wasn't the first one to think about this. He was building on the work of Vitruvius, a Roman architect who wrote about human proportions fitting within both a circle and a square. And Vitruvius himself traced this back to ancient Greece, Egypt, and even Phoenicia. It's knowledge that goes way back. Swedenborg even wrote about how the ancients understood these correspondences, hinting that they had knowledge that we've lost touch with.
Wow, it makes you wonder what other secrets are hidden in these ancient traditions. But going back to those shapes, is there one that's considered like the most fundamental in sacred geometry?
The circle, especially with a point at its center, is probably the most universal. It represents the sun, of course, but also wholeness and the cyclical nature of creation. Black Elk, a Native American wisdom keeper, described it beautifully, saying, "Everything the power of the world does is in a circle."
I love that quote. It makes me think of those mandalas you see in Eastern traditions with their circles and patterns going outward. It's like the circle is this starting point for everything.
And if we focus on the circle with 6 rays,
Okay.
we encounter the hexagon and the concept of the 7 stars. This is cool because it also implies a cube, revealing a hidden 8th point behind the center, representing a spiritual source.
Whoa, a hidden point. Okay, this is getting pretty metaphysical, but I kind of get it. It's like a spinning wheel where the center is perfectly still, even though everything's moving around it.
That's a perfect way to put it. It points to this idea of a timeless, unchanging reality underlying the world of change. It's a concept found in many spiritual traditions, this idea of a still point at the heart of creation.
Okay, my brain is doing gymnastics here, but I'm loving it. This is so much more than just shapes. What other shapes hold these deeper meanings?
Well, the Vesica Pisces is another key one. It's made by 2 overlapping circles, kind of like cell division.
Ooh, I like that. 2 circles coming together to create something new. It sounds almost like the beginning of creation itself.
What's amazing is that the Vesica Pisces contains the geometric basis for all the basic polygons. The triangle, the square, the hexagon, and so on.
Hold on. So you're saying that from this one shape, this intersection of 2 circles, you can get all these other forms.
Think of it like a hidden code inside the Vesica Pisces. There's this visual sequence showing how all these polygons come from this shape, expanding outward in this beautiful progression. It's a powerful way to show how complexity can come from simplicity, how all these diverse forms are connected at their root.
Okay, so the Vesica Pisces is clearly more than meets the eye. And it sounds like it was pretty important for early Christians, too. I've seen it in some of their art.
Absolutely. They adopted it as a symbol of Christ, the creative force of the cosmos.
That makes sense, given its connection to the birth of form and perpetual creation. It's like this blueprint for everything that exists.
Exactly. And that idea of continuous creation is perfectly expressed in the beginning of John's Gospel. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. It speaks to that creative power in the Vesica Pisces, this idea that everything comes from this one fundamental form.
And this is where Hendrix comes back in, right? With the Brickman Center doors, he used this shape in his design.
Yeah, he actually used the Vesica Pisces to create the arch above the doorway.
It's like he built a whole philosophy into the doorway. I'm starting to see architecture in a whole new light.
That's the beauty of sacred geometry. It lets us see these deeper meanings in the world around us. And speaking of, remember that oak tree on the college property? The one planted in 1877?
Yeah, the one Hendrix used for the doors?
Exactly. He chose that wood, intentionally connecting the building to the roots of the place. And he used hand-blown glass, a technique that's been around forever, for the windows. It's all about combining these ancient techniques with this deeper understanding of geometry.
That's incredible. He wasn't just building a doorway, he was creating a portal into a whole different way of seeing. But we haven't talked about that rose window yet, the one with the seven-fold geometry. What can you tell me about that?
Ah, the rose window. That's where things get even more mysterious. 7 is a hard number to work with geometrically. Some even say its geometry hasn't been revealed.
So 7 is like the rebel of geometry. Intriguing. But I'm guessing Hendrix had a reason for choosing it, especially at a new church college.
Oh, you're right. The number 7 is really important in new church teachings. It represents new beginnings, holiness, and full states of wisdom.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So the rose window, with its sevenfold geometry, represents this striving for understanding, this evolution that's at the heart of the new church.
Exactly. And it's not just a static symbol. If you look at a 7-pointed figure, it's always visually in motion, always seeking its resolution in the next beginning. It's like the idea of a new church always changing and seeking truth.
Wow, this is all so mind-blowing. We started with shapes, and now we're talking about the cosmos and spiritual truths. That's pretty cool.
What's fascinating is that this ancient knowledge challenges us to see beauty not just as something that looks nice, but as a reflection of deeper order and harmony. It's not just random. It's woven into existence.
I'm definitely seeing the world differently now, but do you think everyone who walks through that doorway at Bryn Athyn picks up on all of this?
Maybe not consciously, but that doesn't mean they're not affected. Hendrix even quotes Titus Burckhardt, who said, "Beauty is nothing but the transparency of its existential envelopes, and art is beautiful because it is true."
That's deep. It suggests that there's a truth to beauty whether we know it or not. And it makes me wonder, what makes something beautiful to you? Is it just you, or is there something more?
That's a good question. Yeah, that is the question, isn't it? What makes something beautiful? Hendrix's work really makes you think about that.
Yeah.
Because he's not just creating beautiful stuff. He's like inviting us to rethink our whole idea of beauty.
Yeah. It's like he's saying, hey, look closer. There's more here than you think. And it's working because now I'm like looking at my coffee cup and wondering if there's some secret geometry in it.
And that's exactly what Hendrix is going for. He wants us to see how everything's connected, how the same stuff that makes the planets move also shows up in us, in buildings, even flowers.
It's like we found the secret formula for beauty. Math doesn't seem so boring anymore.
Exactly. And don't forget, for the ancients, math wasn't just equations. It was a spiritual path, a way to connect to the divine.
Which makes me think, if these geometric ideas are so universal, so timeless, why did we lose touch with them? What happened?
That's a great question, and honestly, there's no easy answer. But I think part of it is because of science. It tends to focus on the material world and measuring stuff. We started valuing reason over intuition, breaking things down instead of putting them together.
Right.
And along the way, we lost sight of those deeper connections that the ancients understood.
So it's like we traded the telescope for a microscope, we zoomed in on the details and forgot to look at the big picture.
Perfectly put. The good news is that people are getting interested in these old ways of thinking again.
Right.
They're realizing that science and spirituality can work together.
And Hendrix is a great example of that. He's bridging that gap, showing that beauty can be useful and meaningful.
Right, and by using these timeless principles, he's creating something that lasts, not just physically, but spiritually.
Yeah.
His work is meant to inspire, to uplift, to connect us to something bigger.
I love that. It's like legacy projects, not just buildings. And think about the impact on future generations. Imagine students at Bryn Athyn 100 years from now still feeling those geometric vibes.
It's amazing, right? It shows how art can go beyond time. When we create something from a place of understanding and connection, it can affect people for generations.
Yeah, I think Hendrix would agree with that. He even says that true art is a reflection of truth. And that brings us back to our question. What makes something truly beautiful?
Maybe it's whatever speaks to our deepest self, what connects us to something timeless and universal. It's more than just looks. It's about feeding the soul.
And maybe, just maybe, if we understand these old geometric ideas, we can create a world that's not only more beautiful, but more harmonious, too.
That's a great goal. And who knows, maybe Hendrix's work is the start of that. He's planted the seeds, now it's our turn.
Well said. I'm feeling inspired to look for those hidden geometries in my own life. You never know what you might find.
That's the spirit. And remember, you don't have to be some math genius to appreciate this stuff. It's everywhere, just waiting for us to see it.
So true. We could all use a little slowing down, paying attention, and opening up to the wonder of the world.
And who knows, maybe we'll find some of that ancient wisdom along the way.
I'm in. This deep dive has been incredible. My mind is blown, and I'm seeing everything differently.
And that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
To keep learning, growing, and expanding our understanding of ourselves and the universe.
Well said. But before we finish up, I want to go back to something. Remember that seven-pointed figure, always moving, never quite getting there. It made me think of what Hendrix said about beauty being nothing but the transparency of its existential envelopes, and how an art is beautiful because it is true. It's like he's saying beauty isn't a destination, it's a journey.
That's a really deep point. It challenges us to go beyond simple definitions of beauty and embrace change. Maybe true beauty isn't about the end goal, but the process of becoming.
I like that. It reminds me that we're all works in progress, always growing. And maybe that's part of what makes us beautiful, our ability to grow, to change, to be more than we were yesterday.
That's a great way to put it. And that idea fits perfectly with sacred geometry, which shows us that even the most complex things come from simple beginnings. We're all part of this big picture, each of us, a unique part of the divine order.
We've come full circle, haven't we? From the cosmos to our own journeys, it's all connected.
It is. And maybe that's the most important thing we've learned. We're not separate. We're all part of this huge web of life.
That's a beautiful reminder to take with us as we go out and create our own beauty.
I agree. And who knows, maybe we'll even inspire others to join us on this journey of rediscovering sacred geometry.
I'm feeling inspired. And with that, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this adventure into sacred geometry.
It's been great.
We hope you've enjoyed it.
I have.
But before we go, we want to leave you with one last thought. Hendrix talks about how real art reflects truth. So we ask you, what truth do you see reflected in the beauty around you?
Yeah, that's a really good question to think about. It makes you stop and think about what beauty really means.
Right. It's not just about seeing pretty things. It's
Yeah.
about like really looking at them, trying to understand what they mean.
And everyone's going to see something different.
Right.
What's beautiful to one person might not be to another, and that's okay.
That's the cool thing about different perspectives.
Yeah.
But I think Hendrix would say, even with those individual views, there's something that connects us all through beauty.
I think he would agree. Maybe that's what those ancient builders were trying to do with their art and architecture.
Yeah.
They were just making buildings.
Yeah.
They were creating spaces that would touch people's souls, places that would make them feel awe and wonder, spaces that would remind them that they're part of something bigger.
Maybe that's why we still love those old buildings. They have this energy, this feeling that speaks to us.
Yeah, it's like those buildings are still sharing their secrets with us after all these years, like they're trying to remind us of something we've forgotten.
And maybe if we listen closely enough, we can remember that wisdom and use it in our own lives.
That's a beautiful thought, and it's something we can all do. We don't have to build cathedrals or read ancient texts to find this wisdom.
Right? We can start by just noticing the beauty around us.
Yeah,
In nature, in art, in everyday life.
exactly. And by asking ourselves, what is it about this that I like? What does it tell me about myself or the world?
Those are really good questions. And I bet the answers will be more interesting than we think.
Me too. And who knows, maybe by asking those questions, we'll find our own ways to bring beauty into the world.
Well said. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive.
Yeah,
Thanks for joining us on this journey into sacred geometry.
it's been fun.
We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have.
Yeah, it's been great. Remember, the world is full of beauty, both hidden and obvious. Keep looking, keep asking questions, and keep searching for those truths that speak to you.
Until next time.